Welcome, mayors. We are glad you joined us for the March session of the 2023 Economic Mobility Leadership Institute's mayoral cohort. My name is Stacy Fujii with the African American Mayors Association. We have a couple of housekeeping items to consider. First, by now, you should have received an invitation via LinkedIn for our private EMLI group. Please let Darren Vason or me know if you have not gotten that invitation. Second, Mr. Kenneth Kelly of First Independence Bank is here today. He so generously donated his book, and while he's discussing his Wheels platform today, please feel free to ask questions about his book as well. Finally, we are halfway through our cohort and hope you are developing your strategic plans. In the coming weeks, you will be asked to make an appointment with our team to review your strategic plan. This is a check-in and an opportunity for us to offer you support or to answer your questions in a one-on-one setting. Thank you. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our CEO, Phyllis Dickerson, for the welcome.
Thank you, Stacy. Welcome, mayors, to EMLI's March session. It's great to see everyone. As you know, ALMA's Economic Mobility Leadership Institute is focusing on critical learning opportunities for mayors and their teams, with the goal of creating strategic economic mobility plans to implement in your respective municipalities. Today, we begin a third month of sessions with EMLI. To date, we have discussed wealth, home ownership, and now we move in today's topic, estate planning. We have brought some giants from the industry to share tools and advice on how to preserve the generational wealth your constituencies are building. This hour-long session will provide insight and data, as well as share necessary and helpful tools available to develop better systems for wealth retention within your communities. We hope you are enjoying this cohort, and we ask that you submit feedback in your monthly surveys. Finally, I look forward to seeing you in person on April 19th in Washington, D.C. In addition to seeing your beautiful faces, you will receive a sub-grant from the ALMA during the ALMA conference, as well as have short video interviews as part of the EMLI documentary. Thank you for your participation and kind consideration. Back to you, Stacy.
Thank you, Phyllis. We have three special guests joining our EMLI cohort. As I mentioned, Mr. Kelly of First Independence Bank is here. He will kick off our session with his estate planning tool that will help your constituents have peace of mind and protect their assets. Then we will proceed with a panel discussion around keeping generational wealth and some of the pitfalls we need to avoid. Our panelists will include the Honorable Carboy Connors and Mr. Bill Walker of Premier Funeral Home. Please remember to use your chat feature to ask questions throughout the session. Without further ado, let's begin. As we enter this third month of discussing components of economic mobility, today's conversation will focus on estate planning. According to a published October 19th, 2018 article from NASDAQ.com, 70% of families lose their wealth in the second generation, and 90% lose it by the third. A lack of transparency and a failure to discuss end-of-life issues will likely end with issues around unnecessary taxes, costly estate fees, and additional family strife. Wouldn't it be great if there was a tool to help with managing that? Well, today, Mr. Kenneth Kelly, bank chairman and CEO of First Independence Bank, is here to help. He has developed a smart tool that will increase transparency and improve estate planning for our communities. Please welcome Mr. Kenneth Kelly to the Economic Mobility Leadership Institute.
Stacy, thank you so much for that kind and warm introduction. And Phyllis, I want to just say thank you for your leadership of this association. I'm very proud to be associated with you all and look forward to sharing some of the things we've learned over the last couple of years. And hopefully these will be tools that many of the mayors can use in their cities to really change the narrative around one family at a time, how we can really look at moving the ball on this ideal called wealth. I'm about to share my screen with you. I hope you all can see that, but the essence of this is about 3+ years ago, sitting in my seat as a CEO and chairman of one of only about 16 African-American owned and controlled banks out of 5,000. This discussion of wealth is one we've talked about for a very, very long time. But in my research, one of the things I found is exactly what Stacey mentioned. Many of our families do not prepare before they leave here. And so from that analysis, I started to really put pen to paper and actually wrote a book about it, and it's called Prepare Before I Let Go. If you don't mind, I'll try to scroll through some of this, and then we'll talk a little bit about the platform that Stacey mentioned just a moment ago. But you can see there are endorsements, and I think each of the mayors should have a copy now that I personally signed to each. We had endorsements from Secretary of Labor Alexis Herman, who I must disclaim is a relative of mine, cousin, also from the American Bankers Association, from the founder of GAA, Bill Picard, who many may know in the business industry. He's done a wonderful job in the automotive space. And then the very own giant in the financial space, John Rogers, who actually wrote the foreword for our book. But the essence of our story is what we have found is when you look at the components of legacy, Prepare Before I Let Go was really written in let's say a collection of allegories or metaphors to say, you know what, I really don't want to be in this position. And so we documented many names that you know, but also everyday families that really encounter this in ways that's just been taboo and a myth. And so what we decided to do after writing this book was really recognizing that there's a need for a tool that will allow our families to go and make a difference. So we created a low-cost technology platform that I'll share with you a little bit later. But the key components of this is to note that you can do a will, a power of attorney, and a healthcare directive in all 50 states in the US. And so our goal was to try to remove the friction of legacy planning. We're a minority-owned and controlled technology company, but I want to share with you really our purpose around why this is important. All of us should leave here under peace. And many of you have probably been to ceremonies where there may have been peace during the service, but there certainly wasn't after, and in some cases before. We fundamentally believe that when you depart here, which is not an if, but it's a when, peace should be a component of that. Love. We work many of our hours during the day to acquire things with the intent of being sure that our, should we say, product of our work is beneficial to those individuals that we love. And then most importantly, our final acts really become a part of our legacy. And so the intent is be thinking about our legacy today because we do not know the day nor the hour. Changing times requires changing minds, and our legacies have to change in the African-American community. We have started to do that research, as I shared, and what we know is very similar to what Stacey shared earlier. Over the next 25 years, $70 trillion, and that's across the country, will pass hands. And we can see by generation where it will happen. 22 million with millennials, Gen X about 22 trillion, Gen X 31 trillion, and then about 8 associated with the baby boomers. The intent is there's a tremendous amount of value that will pass properly or that will probably not pass properly. And our intent is to be sure that we are helping be an advocate for changing the narrative on this. These were recent headlines as of 2022, about the time we came out with our book. Chase was very supportive of us in doing that. And the headline at that point in time, as you can see, CNBC, NBC News, Ebony did a story and quoted me on this, but it was the state of emergency in Black America because 70% of African Americans do not have a will. And there's a need for a plan around that. And of course, we would say the face of that became our very own and beloved Chad Boseman, who, in fact, I write about in our book. And just to be very clear, this was never written in any intent to be disparaging of any of these people. The intent is really, I'm a fan of all of them, to be very candid with you. But what I wanted to do was use their stories as examples of things that we could certainly prepare for our families very differently. What we also know, and I've shared at very high level, legally valid, full set of documents, asset level planning, state specific. So the state requirements in your state, when you get ready to print the documents out, all of that is very specific to each state. And I think Judge can probably attest to some of those rules and things in part of her presentation a little bit later. We've done a pilot, and what I would share with you, and this is a pilot from years ago. We've got quite a few customers now, but the intent was we show that 30% level of download. So people are engaging. One of the other statistics that I can't really see on my screen, but what we also found is that I believe 70% of the individuals had no life insurance policy. That is a component of wealth that we need to talk about in the African-American community, and is one that I'm certain that we could all certainly make a difference for our families in that regard. And most importantly, what we found, and you'll see in the top, I believe, to your right, is that the rate of women engaging on this topic was 2 times that of men. And we know in most families, the reality is if there is a couple, the likelihood of the man leaving first is probably a little bit higher. So this is an interest of women that is to be candid with you, interest that I think all of us should take some pride in and some engagement in that regard. 68% of our customers who receive financial advice from banks, that's just a little bit to say that banks are trusted in that regard, but only 19% that they say that they are interested. These are just some slides regarding customer satisfaction. I won't get into the details of that, but the question becomes, before we get to a quick Q&A, is what will you do on an institutional level? Because all of us have institutions that are wherewithal, you as leaders, as mayors, and what will you do on a personal level? This is really about changing the stories in a way that we can change times and change minds. Our offering through the association was that we were going to create an opportunity to do 10,000 per city. So each mayor will have 10,000 subscriptions for the first year that will be free. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. But the intent is, here's a great opportunity to do this on behalf of the mayors on this call and part of EMLI in such a manner that we can see the dynamics and see the way that we can really change behavior in the communities that we care about. What I will share with you is, at a very high level, the stories I've written about include Chad Boseman, included Prince. And let me give a disclaimer. As a banker, I did not write about Aretha Franklin because I never want anyone to assume that I know about her business. But specifically, others included Stuart Scott, John Singleton, our hero of age, Boys in the Hood, along with many others, Amy Winehouse. But we also wrote about everyday families. The teacher, female, raised 2 kids, bought a house, paid for her house. She passed away. Those kids ended up getting about the equivalent of around $10,000 for round numbers. The specifics are in the book. But at the end of the day, that house was turned, flipped, and sold for almost $200,000. That type of wealth is happening or being dispersed away from our communities often, and we need to do and make a change in that regard. Regarding the intent of the platform that we created, let me talk a little bit about that. I'm not going to demonstrate it because you can get in the weeds on that pretty quickly, but I want to tell you at a very high level, it's very high tech. I called it an electronic safe deposit box. You basically can put anything that you own in there, and it will store it and catalog it. So just like grandmama's skillet or grandfather's shotgun or her fur, those things can be cataloged, because we all know sometimes when we lose family members, the first one that gets to the house gets the opportunity to pick what they want. So it's a better way of keeping up with the value of our estates. But most importantly, we have the technology that will allow, if you put your home address in there, it will automatically upload the value of that home and track that over time so you can see, and that comes straight out of the Zillow database. You also have the capacity to upload your actual bank accounts in that. And you can do that, and we do that safely through APIs, just like TurboTax and any other money management program that will allow someone to come behind you and see real time what is in those bank accounts. So they don't have to wait on statements or wait on the mail or check and figure out which banks you had accounts at also. You can upload videos, you can upload heirlooms and things of that nature, where you've got paper you can upload in such a manner that will allow someone behind you to come behind you and know really the plethora of things you have in store, so that can be managed properly. And oftentimes that just does not happen in our community. And I can attest to this one big fact. Most of our families, especially African Americans who are from the South, we have family property that ended up becoming heir property. And I have it, I can raise both hands. I have it on both sides of my family. And let me tell you why heir property is important in getting that property titled. One good example, in Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, families that were living in Big Mama's house did not receive the same level, or didn't receive really any relief from FEMA in that whole process. So where many dollars were placed to allow for rebuilding, et cetera, if that house is not properly titled, you can't take advantage of those kinds of programs. And the same is true for air property that's farmland. You can't take advantage of the Black farmers opportunity when that property is titled or encumbered by being air property. And so I want to share that with you just to say, these are some of the high level anecdotes that's so important when we think about someone has spent all of their life working and at the end of the day, it doesn't pass properly. I want to close by sharing this story with you just before I share about the coupon code here and how this program should possibly roll out within your cities. There's a lady by the name of Osceola McCarthy. Many of you may know of her. She was a washerwoman. She spent all of her life just washing individuals' clothing. Coming to the latter part of her life, and this happened in the 90s, she made a donation to the University of Southern Mississippi of approximately $150,000. One, people were in disbelief that someone of such meager means would have amassed such an amount of money. But what was most important is many others were inspired by her significance and her legacy, that they contributed to that and created fully funded scholarships at the University of Southern Mississippi for African Americans. In the midst of that, President Bill Clinton acknowledged her for her contributions to society. And what happened after that, of course, was the media came in, and one of the individuals asked her, Miss McCarthy, wouldn't you like to have done something for yourself with that money? And she looked at the report and said, I just did. The point is that all of us, regardless of your status, whether you make $20,000 a year, 30, 40, 50, or 5 million, you will have a legacy and you have the opportunity to really shape that legacy. And so what this book is about and what My Legacy Items, which is this platform, is about, is ensuring that upon our demise, because it's not if, it's when, each of us have an opportunity to make a very positive statement of why we existed and what we want to happen for those we care about, whether that's individuals or charity that you care about. As I close, you see this coupon code here on the screen. And what we have is, and what we created was the opportunity to try before you buy program. So our software, you don't have to pay for it up front. You basically can put in your information when you get ready to print it, because you, in most cases, you have to print, I think, but all of 2 states to get it notarized and signed. That's when you purchase. And the price we have is $49.95 per year. And as I said, we're going to do 10,000 per city in the EMLI Institute for free for that first year. And the way we've described it is we've got a coupon code that will be assigned to each city. You can see ATL, Georgia, and there's another little code. And what also we have, and would love your feedback on before we go to Q&A, is a free year from Mayor Dickens applied. So it's an opportunity for you as leaders to really show that you care about your community and to push this in a way that really could be beneficial, not just to you from a political standpoint, but also to the citizens of your city. So I'll close there. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation and look forward to your Q&A.
Thank you, Kenneth. Before we move on, I want to say a couple things. One, again, we are making sure that each mayor has 10,000 wills they'll be able to give to the constituents in their area. Mayor Jackson, I know you don't have 10,000 residents, so your wills will also leak over into St. Louis for Tashara to use those that you don't use. Second piece.
Well,
go ahead.
Actually, I am the vice chair of 24/1 Municipal Partnerships. We recognize all over the United States. We represent about 60-something thousand people. And so in our it's 23 cities actually in one school district, which would take that 10,000 up pretty quickly.
Good, good.
Yeah.
So thing we want to make sure, you guys, we will be giving you guys the link to the platform and the code. You will do what we call launch events. And so I know in Little Rock, we've done something like this before. I think I've told you, where you go to a Black church, you invite everybody to come, you bring volunteers from banks, estate planning companies, accountants, people that people trust in the community, to help them actually go through the platform, put all their information in. At the end of that day, the platform will actually tell you how much you saved in Black generational wealth. And so you'll be able to say at the end of the day, Mayor Jackson, you saved $20 million today in Black generational wealth that day. All right. And so we can calculate this, and Kenneth can track it for us on how much you're actually saving with your constituents. The second piece I want to tell you is I did meet with NARAB, the National Association of Black Realtors. They are going to be using the platform also help. They're going to help as volunteers. You're going to meet your NARAB partner during the conference. They actually are all 9 coming to the conference. So you're going to meet them there. And they have also agreed to not just on the platform now, but going forward, every time they sell a property in your particular area, they're going to take $50 of their commission and use the platform to put that particular property into a will. And so, Kenneth, that's new to you, but so NARAB will be using the platform also. So that's to stop the bleed as we move forward on on home ownership or land property acquisitions and that kind of thing. So those are 2 things we want to move forward on as it relates to the platform. So now let's move to the second part of this. The Honorable Cara Bo Connors is a circuit court judge in Pulaski County, Arkansas, originally from Memphis, Tennessee. She was educated at Hendrix College and attended law school at William Bowen Law School at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. She is a licensed to practice law in Tennessee and Arkansas. She was just elected in 22 as a circuit court judge in Pulaski County and took the bench in January 1, 2023. And then Mr. Bill Walker is the owner of Premier Funeral Home and Chicken King Restaurant. He served as director of Arkansas Department of Career Education, as an Arkansas Parole Board Commissioner, as an Arkansas State Senator, and member of the House of Representatives, as well as Pulaski County Quorum Court. Please welcome Judge Connors and Bill Walker to EMLI. So let's jump into the questions. And you guys, along the way, as I'm asking questions, please feel free to put questions in the chat, and we will pause for your questions. So Judge and Bill, I know you guys are big ballers in the city of Little Rock. I just want to ask each of you, you can unmute now. I can ask each of you, do you all have a will? And was it hard to sit down and have that family conversation with your family about who was getting what? Judge?
Phyllis, I will yield to the, go ahead.
I'm not to embarrass myself, but I'm going to be just transparent with everyone that I have not drafted a will. I have had my parents have their wills drafted, but I have not taken those steps personally. But what I do have, with my husband and I both have, our life insurance policies. And we have policies on ourselves. We have term life on our children. I think we even have, my uncle is a life insurance agent. I think I have about 4 policies with him. And so that is sort of where I wanted to focus. I know that wills are necessary and are definitely a part of estate planning that you should have, especially when you have multiple real properties. It becomes very important to have one, but life insurance policies are, to me, where so many Americans have built wealth in this country. I mean, if you've been watching the Murdoch murders, you've seen that the documentaries on how that family profited off of life insurance policies, payouts of people that were not even family members. So it's a way to build wealth. It's a way to limit tax penalties. So I'm a fan of the life insurance policies, but wills are definitely something that are necessary. And so I'll pass on. I'll stop talking and pass it on to Mr. Walker.
Well, thank you, Phyllis, and certainly to my honorable judge. Proud to have her where she is and proud to play a little small role. Let me also say and acknowledge my long-term friend, Phyllis, and certainly our national mayor, President, Mr. Frank Scott, who I guess in his absence, I want to certainly acknowledge and just all the good work that you all are doing. I was extremely excited to hear the presentation from Brother Kelly. I thought it was extremely helpful, and I would encourage not only a collaboration, Phyllis, with others, but I certainly think the Funeral Home Directors Association might be a great opportunity to collaborate with on this. We see a lot of these people, and of course the Black churches as well. Having said that, I do have a will. I did not do my will probably until about I was late, probably about 5-6 years ago, and I also established a trust. And a lot of that was because of what I witnessed firsthand in the business. It is just, a recipe for no will, if you will, is a recipe for chaos, confusion, family fighting. Just to keep it real, I mean, before the deceased is put in the ground, I've seen things just that are almost shameful occur. But it is what and why that is. I guess I'd have to ask myself that question. We just don't like to talk about dying and death. And of course, I feel like we spend so much time trying to figure out just how to live in all the chaos in society until we don't even think about dying. So we think we live forever. But to answer your question, Phyllis, yes, I do have a will. I also went forward and established a trust. And I think that everybody should have that. Another part of the insurance question that Just Connors raised is we do a lot of pre-needs because that's really a will as it relates to your funeral services. Here's what I want to have. Here's the selections I want to make. Here's where I want to be buried. And that takes a tremendous load off of families. It's a game changer, frankly, when families come in and they're just confused and you got certain members want to go right and the others want to go left. If that decision's already made, it is a blessing to that family who's taken that initiative to pre-plan for that service, that funeral service.
I'm glad you guys talked about this. I got a call this morning that my 35-year-old cousin was found dead in Mexico. And I called his grandfather because you already know it's going to be an issue trying to get his body from Mexico back to San Diego. And so I called his grandfather, who's the responsible person. I said, do you have his birth certificate? Do you have Social Security card? Like, do you have all the identifiable documents? And he said, yes, I do. And I said, do you, I said, they're going to lean on you to pay for everything. Do you have a life insurance policy on it? He said, yeah, I got that too. And I said, oh, how much do you have? He said, I have $100,000. And I was a little taken back, like, wow. He said, I had that on every grandchild. And how much security is that to say, you never thought that his grandchild would die in another country, but there is a cost associated with moving the body from Mexico back to California also. But he is prepared. So one thing he's not worried about is the finances of it. And so, Bill, as you talk about, and I know you've seen this on the ground because I've seen it a million times, the emotion that people go through when they come to the funeral home and then they have to come in and deal with all the stuff. And then they realize there's no insurance, there's no money. Why do you think people don't really sit down and make those plans?
Well, I think historically in our community, Phyllis, we just don't like to talk about death and dying. We, for whatever reason, feel like, somebody else will deal with that. I don't want to talk about it. It doesn't matter. I mean, and it continues on throughout generations. I mean, there's some of us, and I guess because I've been called to this, I call it a ministry, I'm able to kind of understand it better, but it's still no excuse for the chaos and the pain that already exists just by merely having the sudden death. but just not being even more prepared. I mean, so your families who may already be struggling, struggle to pay, for the cost of those services. But we just, for whatever reason, we just don't want to confront that potential issue in our community. And so it takes education, it takes training, it takes examples of folk that have done it and those that have not. And I think we've got to begin to talk about it more. And that's why I was glad to see Brother Kelly's presentation where he talked about examples of who did not and what happened. And so we got to be proactive. We got to educate. We've got to use the forums where we meet them where they are. And we've got to have people that can connect to them where they are to begin to talk about this. Look, and it doesn't matter the age. That's the other thing. We feel like that's something we can deal with when we get to be 60 and 70 and 80. But we see all ages and all colors and all races and all genders every day. And it's a challenge for us.
And so average cost, my mom died, 17 years ago now, Bill?
Yes.
And her funeral was about $12,000. What's the average cost that you definitely need in a life insurance policy to get it all done?
Well, that's pretty average still today. Back then, Phyllis, that was probably more than average, frankly. But I would think you're talking between $8,000 and $10,000 for a reasonably decent service. But things are changing. Things are going up. Cemeteries are getting more expensive. Products are getting more expensive. The cost of labor is obviously gotten more expensive. The cost of vehicles have gotten more expensive. So that continues to rise and to change. But then there's a way to just do that. But I like the idea of just getting an insurance policy and then taking a portion of that insurance policy and do an assignment to the funeral home. That way you're not just paying for the executive. Now, the difference in the pre-need though is that you actually specifically pick out the products and services you want. And so, I want this casket, I want to go to this cemetery, I want 2 cars, I want to be this, that. So it's a little bit more specific, but it's specific to and whatever that fees and charges are at that time. It's that amount of money that you pay. Now, the good thing also about it is that never changes. So as prices continue to increase, you've sort of locked in the price of your desires and your services that day, and it's on it for if it takes you another 50 years to pass away, that's the price you will pay. Now, it doesn't cover things like flowers and things because those are things that we don't control, and anything sort of outside beyond the basic casket and all, it is something that has to be added on if and when we get to that point.
And then Judge, what does it, we're gonna go to the chat questions after yours, but what does it take to make the will valid?
So the will is contingent upon where you reside and what laws govern that will. I'm not as familiar with other jurisdictions, but in Arkansas, you have to have sound mind, which just means that you have to know voluntarily what you're doing. And sound mind to some might mean something very different in the legal terms. You can have what we call moments of clarity, intermittent moments of being sound and write your will. And a court can determine that during that momentary moment of sanity, essentially, or sound mind, that your will is valid. So in Arkansas, you're 18, over the age of 18, you're of sound mind, and you have 2 disinterested attesting witnesses. So that means that 2 people that will not benefit from the estate at the time of probate. Now, there are instances where an interested party has attested, and the court has found that either you can disavow, meaning you can, renounce your interest from the will, and the will still be considered valid by your signature, as an heir, or you can elect to take against the will, meaning you would inherit what you would have gotten had there not been a will in place. If that will is determined, if you're interested, you've come to be later an interested party. But for a basic will to be valid, it requires 2 signatures of disinterested parties. It has to be, you have to sign in the presence of those 2 disinterested parties. You have to be of sound mind, as I stated, and that is a moving target on what sound mind is. And of course, you have to be over the age of 18. And be able to identify and be aware of what your assets entail. And so that's the general rule in Arkansas. I mean, and Arkansas law is so fluid as to whether a will is valid. And that is what you call an attesting will. There's a holographic will, which a holographic will is where I simply write it myself and there's no attesting witnesses. As the decedent, I write it, it's in my handwriting, and then you have 2 witnesses who can essentially vouch that this is my handwriting and that I wrote this will. And those are usually end up in a will contest as to whether the will is valid or not. And many times if the will is determined to be invalid, then you would go what we call intestate. And that means that the court will distribute the assets basically based according to your status as an heir. And it's usually per stirpes or per stripes. It's a legal terms on how you determine what your percentage of the assets would be as an heir. And Arkansas is a state where we still use dowry and courtesy. And what dowry and courtesy is these are all Latin terms, y'all, and can get kind of bogged down, but dowry and courtesy are rights of the surviving spouse that you can elect against a will. So if for some reason you are the surviving spouse and your spouse did not include you in the will, you can still elect against the will and be guaranteed 1/3 of the decedent's estate. You would be entitled to a homestead, which means that the residence that was the primary marital property you would be granted a life estate for that. So basically for the remainder of your life, you would be entitled to that homestead. So a will is definitely something necessary, but it doesn't always guarantee that it's not a messy situation at the time of death.
Phyllis, may I
I'll
ask,
jump in on a couple of topics here, if you don't mind. So part of what we try to solve for with the software is compliant in all 50 states, as Judge just shared. All of the states are very nuanced. And what is very unique about our platform is it's almost, let's call it audit checking. Very much if you've used TurboTax, it will say, well, you can't do this, or here's an outcome of that. So it has tutorials inside of our platform to help you through that process. Because as Judge just shared, none of us have probably been to law school to understand all the Latin terms and what they really mean. We just know oftentimes when we leave court, we felt like somebody hit us over the back of the head. So what we've done with the platform is try to really bring that down to a very, very simple level at that cost of $49.95. And then I want to make one other really good point, because when we talk just about wills, we think only about old or dying. This is a life, personal, business issue. And let me give you the example of what I learned in the writing about this and developing of this product. My kids, when they turned 18 years old, they became legal adults. It doesn't matter how much tuition I pay and rent and all those kinds of things. They are by law legal adults. Well, what does that mean, Kenneth? That means right now, if one of my kids and they don't have a power of attorney or healthcare directive, if one is in an accident, the doctors could actually be required to go to the court to determine what should be done with them. I, as a parent, don't have that as per se the say-so over them. And my only point of this is I want to start this discussion around legacy planning more so than estate planning, because the reality is when our kids turn 18, we need to know that there are things they need to do and sign off on that puts them in a position of protection regarding, do you want to be resuscitated, which is something we may hopefully never will have to encounter. But the last thing you want to do is have to go before a judge to ask for leniency on this issue regarding your child, or have a doctor intercede and do it on behalf of your child or loved one. And so I want to, hopefully, as we start talking about these, as Brother Walker just described a moment ago, this needs to become very common personal business language for us, because it is a business, to be candid with you. And each time we have to go through intestate, promise you there's a lawyer involved, there's someone else involved, where they're having some billable hours associated with your affairs.
If I could, Phyllis, add to that, because one of the questions I wanted to go back to the judge on was to follow up to your question. And while I think, I was fortunate enough to kind of get all that squared away, many folks, especially older folks, just want to do a will and they want to write it out, or they don't have the benefit of getting a lawyer. My question is, just to have a will, who is the keeper of that will? Because we obviously know the person that writes that will, but should that be on file somewhere? How is it in Arkansas where it's considered a legal, righteous will if I don't have the lawyer doing it, and if I don't have the program that Brother Kelly has? How can I make sure that my wishes are carried out through the will with what little or much I might have for the average person?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I know I drafted wills in my private practice, and I still preserve them for clients. But in Arkansas, you're not required to file them after they've been drafted. I have seen individuals do such, and it would be recorded in the records of the court with the court clerk, but it is not required. I mean, it's not a requirement for it to be considered valid. You just have to have safekeeping, a safety deposit box, a file cabinet in your home, sharing a duplicate with a trusted family member. I mean, but that it's no requirement, which, frankly, I think it should be, to make it keep a record of it, but it probably would overload the court system with filings. But there is no requirement. It just simply, and that's what leads to the disputes that you're talking about, that I talked about, that Mr. Kelly talked about. And so I'm excited. I want to look at the software too, Mr. Kelly, because
it's very simple. MyLegacyItems.com. Yeah. So Judge, you're exactly right. And that's the challenge with just, quote, talking about this as a will, is that people will, even those in the 30% who get them done, the challenge becomes, where is it and which one's the latest? Yeah. We tried to solve for that, because when it's electronic, it's documented what's the date. And in addition to that, Brother Walker, you can also assign multiple people to have access to it up on your demise, or they can have preview to a portion of it prior to. So you could send it directly today to say, you know what, I want Judge Connors to have access to this electronically. She can sit at her desk, know everything that's about your will there. So what we tried to solve for was making it very easy to know what's the latest on record, and someone can have access to it and not have to go on what I call the proverbial treasure hunt of where is the will. And so therein lies which one's the last one.
And you guys, we have a couple of questions in the chat. Andrea, you can unmute. Go ahead and ask your question and to whom you want it directed to.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone allowing me to speak. The question that I had, and this question was for Kenneth. You were speaking earlier about how we can use the site to be able to make sure that our documents are uploaded, but I'm interested in finding out how we can contextualize for, especially in cities that have a digital divide, how do we contextualize the need, the strong urgency and need for these services to our elders and to persons who may not have some of the resources needed to get these documents into your platform?
Yeah, I would tell you that's a whole nother issue, and one we've been working with Robert Smith on, the whole digital divide. And I'll just acknowledge it by saying, when we saw COVID happen in Detroit, we had over 200,000 kids who didn't have access to do their work online. So we recognize that that's a big problem in this country, and we know it affects brown kids more than it does others, and especially Black kids. So that is a problem. But I think as you think about the resources around the Hollywood squares on this panel, you've got mayors who have the capacity to start talking about this in a way that's really forceful in their communities. And I think we'll start seeing the harnessing of resources to help with that, even on what I would call our elders or more senior individuals. But the reality is a lot of us have access to this thing now called a phone. And so you can quickly go to mylegacyitems.com, and that's not an advertisement as much as it is to say it puts the power right here in your hands now a lot quicker. And so what we'll have to do is have individuals like churches, like Phyllis talked about earlier, and others who may volunteer their time to be sure that the loved ones in their space, in their sphere, are taken care of in this regard. But to be candid with you, I see this as a movement in our community. It is what I call personally now my mission work, because I think we could really see a lot of the outcomes not be what Brother Walker talked about. We've seen it. That's why we talked about peace, love, and legacy. We want to change the narrative away from the strife and watching family members not speak ever again. And it's happening to, let me just be clear, all cross economic spectrums. And I have talked to an attorney who his wife is not speaking to the sister because a car was donated to the granddaughter and she turned around and immediately sold it. And they are not speaking because of that one issue. So these things are very piercing to our loved ones and to families. And so to your point, I think it's going to take a galvanizing effort of communities talking about this like we are today and harnessing the resources to make it available to those who don't have it.
And then Mayor Messam, I know you're on the call. If you could unmute and ask your question.
Thanks so much. And pardon my screen, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, well, thanks for the presentation. I think this is an amazing dialogue regarding the legacy of our constituents, primarily our African-American community. There's a couple of topics that came up in terms of not only just protecting assets, last wills and testaments for our loved ones when they should be deceased. Was just curious, and this can go to all of you and from your perspective, as it relates to asset protection, is there more access or additional information as relates to trust and protecting assets, whether it's a land trust, a living trust? These instruments can protect from a will perspective, you know, the final wishes, avoiding potentially a probate situation, having to deal with that in a court, and as well as being able to transfer assets to either eliminate or significantly reduce tax implications as relates to the transfer of assets upon a loved one being deceased and passing down property to their family members. So if you all can touch on that, be great.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Mayor, good to see you, in 06 to you, by the way. Would love to share that, you know, you're starting to get into what I would call a little bit of more of the sophisticated aspects of this. We have the capability of doing that electronically, but to keep the cost at $49.95, we have the trust component really turned off because you're really becoming very custom at that point. But to answer your question for the broader audience here, having a trust is one way to avoid a will. So just to be real clear, when you have a will, it has to be probated with the county, respective county that you live in or the decedent lived in, to really handle and manage those affairs. The reality is it can take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on what's going on and the magnitude, et cetera, in dealing with getting that to a point of resolution. So let me be clear. That house you're trying to pass, if it's going through a will and it's going through the court, it may be 2 years later before that takes place, just to put it in perspective. Whereas what Mayor just described is if that house was put into a family trust, identifying the intent of how that house is to be used, it becomes a component of the trust, and then the heirs become beneficiaries of the trust. And so it has a way of perpetuating without having to be part of public record. So trusts are a very effective method of doing that. Again, I'm not an attorney, so please don't take any of what I'm saying from a denotation standpoint. Take it connotatively is the way I would describe it. But what Mayor's bringing up is a whole nother subject that I think needs to be part of this general discussion of how do you pass information or pass your properties and or assets in such a way that they don't have to become public and or may even have some tax advantages. So I'm certainly not a CPA, so I don't want to get into those deep waters. But the point is, we should all know that trust is another effective way of dealing with managing our possessions.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
would just ditto what Kelly, Mr. Kelly said. Trusts are private. They don't have to be filed of record unless there's a dispute. I've had some trust disputes in my court. But yes, it's a way to detail your assets, transfer them without the worry of some tax penalty. There's even trusts that you can create which are called generational skip trust, which essentially, I learned about this recently, where essentially a grantor can transfer assets to their grandchildren for up to $12 million without tax benefit, the significant tax penalty that would be penalized had it been, one generation. But there's ways that our counterparts, I'll just be frank, have maintained wealth in their families by doing such things. So, but I just thought that was interesting fact that I learned.
So as we close out, Judge, I'll start with you.
Then we
So
have one more question. One more
Yes.
question. I think Mayor Jackson had a question as well.
Was in the chat, but the one thing that we find, having pastor going on 22 years and been elected official since 2001, I've dealt with families and deal with families even today who families struggle at end life when end life situations occur. One of the problems that we find when we start trying to talk to people about preparing their wills, I did the same for my mother, get her prepared, but the cost of having a will drafted for African-American families, especially when you start talking about elderly people in underserved areas like mine, what you have is people who are struggling to pay for medicine, food, and utilities. And so when you have that, finding other monies to do something like a will that doesn't keep a roof over your head, doesn't put food on the table, doesn't get you the medicine so you can feel well, becomes an issue. And so this 10,000, the 10,000 wheels that I have will probably go so fast because we have a large nonprofit that we collaborate with to build, bring banks, stores, movie theaters, clinics, and everything here in this footprint. And so I believe those 10,000 will go and people will be looking for 10,000 more. It's not that some African Americans don't want to have a will, they can't afford to have it done the right way where they can be assured that it's going to carry out their wishes when they're absent. And so that's how do we get around the cost was the question. Because
So Mayor Jackson, we're working on that as we speak. Right now, this is a 1-year cohort with the Gates Foundation. But don't worry, Stacy and Darian are already on next year asking for more money. So Kelly will let us use the platform again to get you all the wheels that you need. Okay, so we're working on that. We understand, and that's why we wanted to pilot it with the first 10,000. And so as we close out, you guys, Mayor Connors, I know you've seen a lot in your court, Bill, you've seen a lot in the funeral home. If you had one wish that Black families would do in order to keep our generational wealth, what would that wish be? Judge?
Okay, I was gonna let Mr. Walker go first. I was
talked
gonna
too
yield
long.
to him. I'll give the floor to Mr. Walker.
Well, I always yield to my judge. I want you to know that. So absolutely no disrespect.
No,
Phyllis, I
none.
think that's a great question, honestly. And I think that the only answer is, have a will at a minimum. And if it's a more difficult state where there's a lot more to deal with, I think a trust is absolutely the way to go. Whether it's through the platform that we've shared today, that Mr. Kelly has shared today, or otherwise. But if we're going to reach the masses, and I think that computer issues and Wi-Fi issues are very, very critically important. But I'm thinking about my mama who has a will now because we insisted that we put one together. But she's not computer literate, nor is she have a computer, and she doesn't have a smartphone. She got a phone with big numbers on it. But it takes those of us that are around her to assist her through that process. She found it to be the most comfortable thing, just getting a neighborhood lawyer to put it together. And she told him what she wanted and what she didn't want, and that was her will. Some can't even afford the lawyer, as has already been mentioned. But we got to find a way to simplify this and to make it easy, because sometimes you discover that mama has a little more than what she lets on to, and you don't discover that until after mama is no longer with you.
That's right.
So I agree that, but I mean, my ideal wish is that we'd have this all made up, we pre-plan, so as to avoid the conflicts and the tension that goes on with this. And everybody has a special way they want it to be done. And when you've got multiple family members, that can be a little chaotic. And if mom has already said, no, I want it this way, all we got to do then is respect mama's wishes. So I think this is great. I think this is certainly needed. And I appreciate the opportunity just to share a small part in this. And I look forward to seeing how we can help this grow. And like I said, if the Funeral Home Owners Association locally and certainly nationwide can be helpful, I think it may be a good avenue for them to share platforms like Brother Kelly's platform, so those that come in and just do pre-needs, because it doesn't have to stop there and just say, look, you can start here, do this pre-need, and you may want to think about this at another level. So, but that would be my one wish, just to kind of sum it up.
Judge?
I'll be quick. To really kind of correlate with Mayor Jackson's question, cost, one simple way to kind of avoid cost are holographic wills, and that can be solved by education. I mean, simply educating the public on what a valid will requires. And essentially, it's just that person's signature and what they wish to happen. That is one easy, quick fix, but it requires education. It requires those with the knowledge, sharing that knowledge. Here in Arkansas, we host legal clinics, our what we call the W. Harrell Law Society, which is a Black Lawyers Association, where we host CLEs, and we partner with Arkansas Legal Services, where we put on clinics twice a year, different parts of the state. And so we educate the public. It's just a matter of being accessible to those resources and knowing where to go and where to look for those resources. But if I could just educate our people on what we need to really maintain wealth, I think that would transcend generations and really make the movements we want to see in our communities. But that would be it.
All right, Mayor Kelly. I mean, not Mayor Kelly. I just named you a mayor. I just promoted you.
I'm not there yet. I think I'm gonna support these mayors is my best position to play. I'm gonna stay in my lane, so to speak. Thank you, Phyllis, again for this. It's very simple for me. It's all of us will have a legacy. What do we want that to be? We have the opportunity to write our own story, that ending, versus letting someone else fumble up on it through the messiness. And so for me, it's about what we talked about earlier, peace, love, and legacy. If a lady like Osceola McCarthy can do this, just washing people's clothing, she will be into perpetuity at the University of Southern Mississippi, paying for scholarships for African-American kids as long as that university and that foundation exists, long beyond her years here on earth. All of us have that capacity. For me, if I had a wish, it would be that every single person on this Hollywood Squares and all of the families we touch think about their lives in the same way as an Osceola McCarthy.
Perfect, perfect. Well, you guys, again, we will, when we finish the cohort, we will be getting you the information as to how to use the platform, the code. And Judge, I'll meet you in Little Rock so I can do my will at the Little Rock. Scott will actually do. I'm excited. I'm gathering all my financials now to make sure all my stuff is in the platform. Stacey, can you close us out?
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We recorded today's session and we'll make it available online. You'll be able to see the links to the products discussed today in our EMLI LinkedIn group. Special thanks to Mr. Kenneth Kelly of First Independence Bank, Judge Connor and Mr. Bill Walker of Premier Funeral Home for completing our session discussing estate planning. Our next session will be during our April 19th, 2023 AMA conference in Washington, D.C. We will be discussing insurance. Be sure to follow us on social media at Our Mayors and visit us online at ourmayors.org. Thank you for joining us today. This concludes our session.